Hare Krishna, welcome to our Gita Gyan level 2. This is week 13 now. So we will start with some prayers. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chaksurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Sagrajadam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurange Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nitinamini Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vigna Vinasha Narasimha Iti Namine Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langayatim Girim Yatkripa Tamaham Vande Shri Guru Vigatarinam Paramananda Madhavam Sri Chaitanya Ishwaram Om Tatsat. Hare Krishna. So we are continuing with week 13 with our Gita Mahatmya from the Padma Purana, Uttarakanda. So Lord Shiva continues to speak to Gauri. So he recounts a conversation that took place between Lakshmi and Lord Vishnu. Sri Vishnu said, "Now I will tell you the glories of the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And whoever hears this description with faith will be liberated from this material world." So the story begins with a description of a holy river. So this is the river Godavari. You can see here, that's the pointer option. Okay. You can see here, this is the map of India, and somewhere in the central region, it's basically moving from left to right. So the river Godavari, it begins from Brahmagiri. Giri means mountain, Brahmagiri, which is in this region of Maharashtra. And from there, the river flows westward. It flows westward towards the Western Bay, and empties into the Bay of Bengal. So you can see here from Maharashtra, it passes through Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, and passing through quite a big area of Andhra Pradesh, until finally goes into, empties into the basin of the Bay of Bengal. So here's a picture of the Godavari River. So one of the 7 holy rivers. Of course, there are many holy rivers in India, but there are principal 7 holy rivers: Ganga, Yamuna, Chaiva, Godavari, Saraswati, Narmadi, Sindhu, Kaveri. So Godavari is one of them. So on the bank of this Godavari River, our story begins. This, of course, took place many thousands of years ago. And you can see how these rivers, which are mentioned in our scriptures, are still present now. So they are not, these stories are not a fragment of our imagination. It's real history. And there's a town. There was once a beautiful town of the name Pratishtanpur. Pratishtanpur. Sometimes it's also referred to as Python. And then this town is still existing in India. And Lord Shiva says, in that town, Pratishtanpur, now currently known as Python, I am famous by the name of Pipaleshwar. So Pipaleshwar Shiva. Pipaleshwar means Lord and protector of the great sage Pipalada. So one of the sage Pipalada, there's a story that took place behind it. So this is a modern temple which is built now in glorification of that pastime. So what happened is, in that town, there was a town which we mentioned next to the Godavari River. So in that town, there was a king by the name of Jan Shruti. And this king, the people loved this king very much because he had very, very wonderful qualities, very divine qualities, unlimited good qualities. And he was very devoted to God, and he performed daily fire sacrifices. He would be very respectful to the Brahminical culture, to the Vedic culture. And in that way, the kings, they follow the Vedic culture. They follow the Brahmanas will direct the king on the performances of various sacrifices or yagya. So daily they will perform fire sacrifices, and which was so opulent and large. So the wealth of the kingdom, the generation of the economy, eventually it is culminating in the sacrifice for the pleasure of the Lord. So these fire sacrifices were so opulent and large that it said, the scriptures say, that the smoke from them reached even the heavenly pleasure gardens in a different dimension in heaven. In Indraloka, it reached the heavenly gardens known as Nandanvan. Nandanvan is one of, there are many, many gardens in heaven, pleasure gardens. So this is one of them. And it seems it made the leaves of the Kalpa Vriksha trees black in color, the smoke. So such was the offerings. It's not like it was environmentally disastrous. No, this is by the arrangement of heaven. The piety of this king was so great that it's just a way of poetic description. So those trees appeared as if they were offering their respects to King Janashruti. So like that, he was performing these fire sacrifices daily. So as a result, right, and with this fire sacrifice, this fire sacrifice is a big setup. Together with it comes charity, so many functions, rituals, and in this way, the economy of the entire country was generated. So when Jan Shruti would give charity, he would distribute just as the clouds distribute the rain. So he was not a stingy king. He was very generous. He distributed the charity to so many, all his people. And it's described that his distribution of charity was just like how the rain, the clouds would distribute rain. So due to this Jan Shruti's pure religious activities, as a result of all this punya karma, or sukarma, or punya karma, pious activities. So he was blessed, and as a king, his kingdom was also blessed profusely. So what would happen? Many wonderful blessings abounded in his land. For example, principally it's described that rain would always come only at the right time. So what is the right time? Is described at night. When everybody is sleeping, that time only it would rain. And the fields were always full of crops, which were not disturbed by the 6 types of rodents. So, undisturbed plantation, agriculture, the land yielded, because of all these sacrifices that were performed for the pleasure of the Lord, the land also bountifully yielded for the kingdom. And he was also, as I said, doing many charitable works. He was digging many wells and lakes for all the welfare of all the citizens. He was always taking care of them. So due to the pious activities of that great king, even the devatas, they sometimes would come and reside in his kingdom. They would walk about in his kingdom in disguise. They will go about. So the conditions of that kingdom was so pious, it was almost like heaven. So it's just like an extension of heaven. So they would also come and walk about amongst the populace. So such was the description. So it so happens, the demigods, being very pleased with this King Janshruti, they would sometimes fly about in the form of birds. And Janshruti, he would feed all these birds. So anyway, once it so happened that there was a group of birds which were flying about. So it's not an ordinary group of birds. Actually, some of the devatas, one of the minor devatas, they were sporting about in this form. So one of them was called Bhadrashva. So Bhadrashva, in the form of a bird, was flying in the form of the swans. They were flying with the other swans. Then one swan flew ahead of the rest near the palace area where King Janshruti was also standing and watching. One of the swans boldly flew overhead and went past the other swans, crossing over the head of King Janshruti. So at that time, the other swans addressed this lead swan which flew away, this Bhadrashva, this devata called Bhadrashva in the form of a swan. They addressed him, "Oh brother, why are you flying ahead? Do you not see in front of you the great king Janashruti, who is so powerful that he can burn up his enemies simply by his desire?" So this King Janshruti, he accrued so much of pious credits that he had all kinds of abilities. So when this Bhadrashva, the swan, heard the words of the other swans, he started to laugh and said, "Oh brothers, is this King Janashruti as powerful as the great sage Raikwa?" So like that, he asked one question. And it so happened, the king, he was there, and the king had a special blessing. Because of his many pious charitable activities, he received many, many blessings from the devatas and also from the brahmanas. And one of those blessings is the ability for him to understand the speech of all creatures. So therefore, he could understand what the swans were talking. So the swans, the swan was flying, and then he brought up the name of the sage Raikwa. Oh, is this King Janashruti as powerful as the great sage Raikwa? So when this king heard this, he became very curious and he became very happy. He thought that this must be a very heavenly sign from heaven, so that I can actually take up a spiritual master, because he was actually looking for a guru. He's performing all these activities and everything, but he was not satisfied inside, this king. Despite performing so much of fire sacrifices, getting so much of material prosperities, even until the level of where the devatas in themselves would be walking on his kingdom, even despite all this material prosperity, the king, he wasn't fully satisfied. He felt that there was something else that he needs to focus further. That is a greater purpose of life. So when he heard this from the swans, he thought this must be a sign. So he immediately came down from the roof of his palace and happily sat on the throne, and he called for his chariot driver. His chariot driver's name was Maha. And then he told the chariot driver, go and find this great sage Raikwa. And this is your task. So when the chariot driver, he heard the king's instruction, he was also a pious chariot driver, and he was also happy for the king. Of course, the king told him, I think that I finally found what I was always looking for, a guru. So then the charioteer, on the order of the king, immediately left in search for Raikwa. So he didn't know where to start. So he thought, possibly most sages, they congregate in the holy city of the very famous learning city of Varanasi. So therefore he went to Varanasi. Varanasi was also known as Kashipuri. Puri means city, Kashi. So Varanasi's name is also Kashi, right? So Kashipuri or Benares, now it's known as. And this is a beautiful city, the oldest living city currently in the world. And over there are many, many temples, but there's a principal temple of Sri Vishwanath, very, very old temple of Sri Vishwanath. This is the picture, but this has been remade. The old temple has been built on top with some, after many, many years and all that. So here's the linga of Sri Vishwanath in this Kashipuri. So he went there, and then he searched everywhere, and then he also went to take the darshan of many other deities. After that, he couldn't find sage Raikwa. Then he left for Gaya, another holy city, a great wondrous city, Gaya. In Gaya, the lotus feet of Lord Vishnu is kept enshrined. The prints of the lotus feet of Lord Vishnu is imprinted on the rock. It's still there, the temple of Gaya, Vishnupada Mandir. So anyway, this is the temple of Vishnupada Mandir. So on this rock over here, there is a imprint of Lord Vishnu. And there is a wonderful, beautiful deity of Sri Gadadhara. Gadadhara means the one who is holding the mace. Gada. Gada means is the mace. They carry the club. So Sri Gadadhara is Lord Vishnu. And he went to Gaya to take the darshan of Sri Gadadhar, who is capable of freeing all beings from the bondage of birth and death. But in Gaya also, he did not find this sage Raikwa. So next, he went to Mathura. So Mathura, right, after having traveled to many holy places, he came to Mathura, which is capable of destroying all sins. In this place, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, resides. So here I'm showing you a picture of Kesi Ghat. Kesi Ghat means bathing place. And this is where Lord Krishna killed the Kesi demon. Kesi is the horse demon. Many, many demons Krishna killed. One of them is the horse demon, and it took place in this area and is famous for that. So people come here, the pilgrims, they go and take bath in this. This is the dark river here. You can see the dark colored river. This is the river Yamuna. So all of the great sages, so he went there because he knew all the great sages, even the Devatas, also the Vedas personified. They take human form, and other Shastras in their personal forms. They perform austerities and render service to Krishna in this place, Mathura. So Mathura, which is in the shape of a half moon, and it is situated on the bank of the beautiful devotion-giving river Yamuna. So he went there. And then like that, he wandered about. So this story here, it will show us many holy places. So like that, then eventually he went to, in Mathura, there is a beautiful hill. This is the hill called the Govardhan Hill. So this is the Govardhan Hill, which Krishna lifted when he was 7 years old. You know, the famous pastime of Krishna lifting the Govardhan Hill. So this is the same hill, it's still there. So in that area, the beautiful Govardhan Hill, it adds splendor and glory to the Mathura Mandal. This is the crown jewel of Mathura Mandal, the holiest area of Mathura. So there also this charioteer Maha went. And then eventually he came into the forest of Vrindavan. So Vrindavan is a very beautiful forest. This is where Lord Krishna used to sport his pastimes, his Leela with the Gopas and the Gopis in his childhood. So there are 12 forests in Vrindavan, beautiful, different forests, Mahavan, Talavan, like that, different. Van means forest. So like that, these 12 forests make up the area called Vrindavan. Vrinda stands for the name of Tulasi. So Vrindavana, forest of Tulasis. So everywhere there will be Tulasis. So like that, this is where Krishna enjoyed the pastimes with the gopis and with Radharani. So this Maha, he went in a pilgrimage, visiting all these holy places. So like that, he was wandering very happily, lost in happiness and bliss, but always trying to look for that sage Raikva. And then later he went north. So leaving Mathura, he went north and west. And then he came to the town known as Kashmir, and in which he saw a very large and shining white place. So it's like a white area, very shining, bright area. The mountains near Kashmir, under the light, they sometimes look very bright and white. At that place, it's described that all of the people, even the foolish people, right, they looked as beautiful as devatas due to the fact that many sacrificial fires were burning continuously. So that was the Vedic culture. The culture of sacrifice was very much ingrained. Sacrifice means that we take the opulence that we get and we surrender it to the Lord. We give it as an offering to the Lord. And then from there, we also give charity to the others. So the idea is to always keep the Lord as the supreme master, and to show our gratitude constantly. So that was the culture of people in those days. So much of fire sacrifices were going on. So it looked as if a row of clouds always hung over the town. Very beautiful, misty. This was Kashmir. So there in Kashmir, this is also a very famous deity of Lord Shiva. He is known as Manikeshwara. So Manikeshwara resided in that town. And it's described that the king of Kashmir had just returned from defeating many kings, and he was engaged in worshipping Lord Shiva. So this king had great devotion for Lord Shiva, for this Manikeshwar form of Lord Shiva. And therefore, he was also sometimes known as Manikeshwara. That means the devotee of Manikeshwara. So, this is the temple in Kashmir, famous for Lord Shiva's worship. You can see very unique architecture, covered by snow. So near that temple, as Maha was going near that temple, just close to the door of the temple, sitting on a small cart underneath a tree, Maha saw a great effulgent personality. So this was the personality. Immediately, Maha felt in his heart that this must be that great sage Raikwa, which I have been searching all along. So immediately, he fell at the feet of this great sage Raikwa. He went there, he fell at his feet, and then he said, "Oh, great sage, please tell me who are you and your place of residence. You are such a highly elevated person. I can see the tejas, the aura coming from you. Please tell me your purpose here." But Raikwa, so in this way, Maha was glorifying Raikwa. But this indeed, this sage was Raikwa, but he was unmoved. He was not disturbed by these words of this Maha. His flattery and all that, it didn't really affect him. He was peaceful and calm. But he listened to what Maha was saying. And then Maha eventually told him that I have been sent to search for you by my king, who heard about you from swans flying across his palace. So then this sage Raikwa, he also thought this must be the act of God. So therefore he said, I am indeed Raikwa, but I'm fully satisfied. There is nothing that I want from you or from your king. I do not require anything. And in this way, he continued with his devotional practices. So then Maha, his mission successful, he returned back to the kingdom of Pratishtanpur, back to his original kingdom, and went to meet his king, Janashruti. So he met his king, and then he was very happy. He told the king, I found this sage Raikwa already. Immediately the king heard about this. He was very happy. He also prepared a big, a big entourage. So he collected lots of jewels, costly silks, and all this he brought as gifts, so that he wanted to meet Raikwa and there give him all these gifts. So he traveled back to Kashmir, the king, and then with all the fanfare and everything, he went and he met he met the sage Raikwa still sitting under the tree as described by Maha. And then he went and offered his obeisances. And then he gave all these jewels and silks and all of these things he brought before the sage Raikwa and put it at his feet. But Raikwa, he saw all these things and he said, who brought all these things? I do not want all these things. And then said, oh, you foolish king, you take all these useless things and put them in your chariot and leave this place. So the king immediately was afraid. He thought, oh, did I make a mistake in my offerings? So then he fell down at the feet of this sage Raikwa and begged his forgiveness and asked his mercy and said, oh sage, I am just a materialistic fool with no knowledge of the self. Please be merciful to me and tell me how you have attained such a high state of renunciation and devotion. Please instruct me as your disciple. So here we can see how the king was very humble. He accepted a very humble approach, even though he was a very great king, even glorified in the heavenly kingdoms also. But yet, when it comes to taking his guru, he became very humble, and then he accepted that I am blinded by ignorance, I am materialistic. But he had faith in something higher, and he accepted Raikwa as his guru. So in this way, Raikwa became very pleased with the humility of this king and his submissive attitude, and also with his desire and inquiry. So Raikwa gently replied, daily I recite the beautiful verses of the 6th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita. And this is how I have attained this state of purity. I have devotion, ignorance have been destroyed from my eyes. I have received the eyes of knowledge, and in this way, devotion has blossomed in my heart. So that's the history of my life. So in this way, Raikwa told the king, and the king begged Raikwa, the sage, please also teach me the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So then Raikwa, the sage, instructed the king on chanting the Bhagavad Gita 6th chapter. So in this way, the king stayed with him and lived with him and served the sage, and in this way engaged in daily reciting the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So in this way, what he did, he gave up his kingdom eventually. He gave it to his sons, and then he completely renounced the world and went to stay with the ashram of his guru and chanted the Bhagavad Gita 6th chapter. And eventually, when he died, he attained the feet of Sri Vishnu. So with that, there is no doubt, Lord Shiva ends his story ends the narration to Gauri. And in the course of time, a flower aeroplane arrived and took him to Vaikunta, a beautiful Pushpaka Vimana, flower aeroplane. It came and brought the king to Vaikunta. And meanwhile, that great sage who was also reciting the sixth chapter of Bhagavad Gita, who chanted daily, he also went to Vaikuntha, where he engaged in the service of the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord Sri Vishnu. So this is the story of the glorification of the sixth chapter of Bhagavad Gita. So the sixth chapter of Bhagavad Gita is known as Dhyana Yoga. So there are many nice lessons we can learn from this. For example, we have learned of how basically material that we've heard about how even though the king is so materially very prosperous, he did not experience total satisfaction. So the lesson here is material prosperity alone cannot guarantee, will never in fact give satisfaction of the heart. So therefore, but there are some jivas who want material prosperity. So therefore, the Lord gives two paths. So the scriptures, they reveal two paths for the jivas. So one is called Pravriti Marga and the other is called Nivriti Marga. So we discussed this also previously in our previous session, Chapter 5 Glorification. Pravriti Marga is the path of materialism. How to gain material, how to satisfy one's senses and one's desires. So the reason we all came to this world is because of desire. And to satisfy these desires, the Lord gives a path for us to follow, a legal path. So that means there are rules and regulations on what one can do, how to legally attain material satisfaction, sense gratification, in this way. Like for example, somebody wants to enjoy the company of the opposite sex, then very simple, go and get married. So therefore, and then have a responsible family life, have children, in this way, bring up a spiritual family. So there is sacrifice involved. So it is not simply, like what is happening nowadays, mostly people simply go about and have a relationship and they just want to have sense gratification, but they don't want sacrifice. They don't want to put in responsibility. So in this way, so much of illegitimate children are born, abortions take place. So this is what Pravriti Marga is all about. It's about responsible sense gratification with sacrifice. So the culture of duty, the culture of sacrifice. So one performs one's duty, and then automatically, by performances of one's duty, one is rewarded. The sense gratifications and the material desires are automatically satisfied by the grace of the Lord. So this is the path of Pravriti Marga. Marga means path. Pravriti means vritti means to actually gain, to gain desires. Pravriti, to gain desires. But Pravriti Marga is okay. Anyway, before I talk about that, and the other one is Nivriti Marga. Nivriti Marga means is to renounce. Okay, that's it. I don't want to go in this direction. That is Nivriti Marga. We'll talk about that in a while. So Pravriti Marga is exactly like how this king Janashruti carried out his duties. So, in the Bhagavad Gita also, chapter 3 basically talks about many aspects of the Pravriti Marga. So in the beginning of this is chapter 3, verse 10. In the beginning of creation, the Lord of all creatures sent forth generations of men and devatas, along with sacrifices for Vishnu, and blessed them by saying, "Be thou happy by this yajna, because its performance will bestow upon you everything desirable for living happily and achieving liberation." So this was given, the Pravriti Marga. So by performing these sacrifices and everything, eventually it will lead to liberation. But how? Pravriti Marga alone cannot give liberation, but it will lead towards Nivriti Marga. Just like how the king, Janashruti, he performed Pravriti Marga so wonderfully, so much of sacrifices and everything he did. In fact, you can see here, verse 11, The devatas, being pleased by sacrifices, will also please you. And thus, by cooperation between men and devatas, prosperity will reign for all. So this was what it was done. Example of such a sacrifice is like Pongal. People nowadays continue with that kind of a sacrifice. So they worship the sun god, during Pongal. Vaishnavas, they worship the sun in the form of Surya Narayan. So like that. But so anyway, this is the example of sacrifices. In charge of the various necessities of life, the devatas, being satisfied by the performances of yajna, will supply all necessities to you. So this is higher arrangement. By performing one's duty, right, then in that way, the devatas will automatically give. So this is the path of pravriti marga. But however, pravriti marga cannot by itself bring complete satisfaction of the heart, because there will always be some frustration. No matter what kind of materialistic gain one gets, because there are naturally 4 problems: birth, death, old age, and disease. So these things are always going to be there. And on top of that, then there is also going to be the 3 types of miseries: the Adi Bhautika, Adi Atmika, and Adi Devika. Adi Bhautika is miseries caused by other living entities, enemies, animals, mosquitoes. And then there's Adi Atmika, miseries caused by the mind. So even if everything is fine, sometimes because our mind is so uncontrolled, we have so much of envy, jealousy, things like that. So even if we have everything, sometimes greed, so these kind of things doesn't leave us satisfied. And then the natural disasters, the changes of time, so all this can affect. So therefore, there is never perfect satisfaction in this material world. So eventually, the person who follows this pravriti marga, they will come to realize this. And as they are coming to realize this, because they are following the Vedic path, they are associating with Brahmanas and holy people. So while they are associating with Brahmanas and holy people, they will come to hear about the Nivriti Marga. How the Nivriti Marga will give what the Pravriti Marga cannot give. It will give liberation. So liberation from the cycle of birth and death. So that is what Nivriti Marga is all about. So if we want to be free from this cycle of birth and death, if we no longer want to take birth again, whether or not, because there's always a risk. We have to suffer our sinful reactions, and at the same time, we also experience our pious reactions. So these things will go on life after life after life. So one who comes eventually to the platform that he feels there is something higher in life, just like this king, the king felt like that. So, and therefore he went into a journey to search for a guru who can teach him the Nivriti Marga. So we learn about the Nivriti Marga. Nivriti means the path of renunciation. We let go, no longer. So, let go, just like how the sage, he was not interested in the gifts given by this king. And you could see how the sage was completely satisfied. He was happy. He had attained Shanti in his heart. So Bhagavad Gita 6.2, this chapter is all about that, the true yogi. So we want to know who is that true yogi, because nowadays in Kali Yuga, there are a lot of imposters who claim they are yogis. So one can never become a yogi unless he renounces the desire for sense gratification. So this is how we can test. So as long as there is desire for sense gratification, such a person cannot take the yogi, is not a real yogi. So that means he no longer has desires to satisfy his senses. If you remember, that is the main cause of why we came to this material world in the first place, because of desires. So if the whole idea of spirituality is bring ourselves, is to come out of this cycle of birth and death. And to do that, one has to come to the point where one is able to renounce sense gratification. So how to do this? So a person is said to be elevated in yoga when, having renounced all material desires, he neither acts for sense gratification nor engages in fruitive activities. So that means his activities are such now, he has come to such a position that he has renounced all material desires and he doesn't work or engage in fruitive activities. Now, this Nivritti Marga is describing, in this Nivritti Marga, there are two paths also. In the Nivritti Marga also, there are two paths. So whatever chapter 6 is talking about, mainly it's talking about one of those paths. That one path is we want to come to the level of renouncing sense desires. We no longer want to come to do that. Now that's a very difficult thing to do. And it's not easy, right? So anyway, but here we are identifying how to recognize a true yogi. So before we talk about the method, let us talk about the goal. The goal, one who is a true yogi, these are the symptoms. In this way, we can understand who is a cheater and who is not. It's very important because, we don't want false renunciation. Falgu Vairagya. Remember that story, Falgu Vairagya, from our level 1, the Falgu river and all that. So therefore, here the warning is given in the Gita for us to recognize the cheater from the real one. And Krishna continues in 6.7. For one who has conquered the mind, the super soul is already reached. So this is the key. The key to spirituality is to conquer the mind. Because Krishna says, right, the mind can be our worst enemy or it can be our best friend. For one who has not controlled his mind, then the mind is one's worst enemy. Because what is the function of the mind? The mind, or sometimes we call it the heart. The mind or the heart is the same thing actually. So the mind's purpose is to actually store our impressions and our desires. This is the purpose of the mind. It's basically a storage of impressions. And if we contemplate on these impressions long enough, then the roots of desires will take place. So these contemplations will lead to desire. And if we focus more on desire, if we think about the desire, if we engage in meditating on this desire, in various ways, then this desire will further blossom into lust. And then when lust is awakened in the heart, then it's very difficult. Then that lust will propel the person to attain that desire in whatever means. It's very difficult to control the mind after that, at that point. So that's why it's very important that one needs to keep all these desires in check. But first we need to know what is the right desire and what is the wrong desire. So that is an important point. So anyway, so here we understand the mind. The mind is the key, right, in all spirituality. So all spirituality is working towards controlling the mind, controlling our desires. So how to do this? It sounds very difficult. How to control one's desires, one's mind? Because always we have all kinds of, we are constantly having all kinds of impressions, all kinds of thoughts are crossing in our mind. So how to do this? Okay, before we come to the method. So further, more symptoms about the true yogi. So because he has conquered his mind, he sees everything. What is the symptom of one who has conquered his mind? The symptoms is, one is he is able to control his sense desires and everything. He also sees everything. Jnana Chakshu, with the eyes of knowledge, he is able to see everything as the same. Same means it's not like he comes and says stone is food and then he eats the stone, not like that. He's able to see everything in the aspect of spirit and matter. So he views everything as either spirit or matter. So that is what is meant in this. So that at that level, that is called a true yogi. So further on this true yogi, right? So now in this yogi path, there are two paths. So here in this chapter, it talks about dhyana yoga. This chapter 6 is known as dhyana yoga, right? Meditation. Sometimes it's also known as raja yoga. So this is the yoga of meditation. So what is this all about? So let's see what Gita says in this. So the jnani path. So as I said, there are two paths, right? One is called the jnana path. The jnana path, right, has this yoga ladder. So let me just move to the jnana. I'll just skip this and I'll talk. Remember this diagram which I showed before? So the path of Nivritti Marga is also known as yoga. Pravritti Marga is not yoga because it's not giving you liberation. So only yoga. Yoga means to connect with the to connect with the Supreme. So Pravritti Marga is a very indirect way of connecting to the Supreme, because one is focused in the focus of that person is to enjoy the material world. That is Pravritti Marga. So it is not directly connecting with the Supreme. Whereas the Nivritti Marga is to seek insight within, or to seek to renounce external aspects and to seek within. So that is Nivritti Marga. And in Nivritti Marga, there are two branches. The first branch is called Jnana Path, the path of knowledge, or sometimes known as the path of light, or is also known as the path of inaction, or the path of renunciation. One is able to renounce everything. So this is where you see, people who follow, okay, let's see what this path is all about. So this path must begin with karma yoga. Krishna tells Arjuna, don't just artificially go and renounce and try to meditate, because you cannot do it. You will be cheating. You have to begin with sacrifice, karma yoga. Perform sacrifice for the sake of duty, and build this culture of sacrifice within your life, within your mind. And after this culture of sacrifice is is second nature to you, that karma yoga will lead towards jnana yoga. This will build towards what is known as culture of knowledge, because sacrifice eventually will lead to knowledge. So that is jnana yoga. So in jnana yoga, at that point, when one is already fixed in trying to look out for knowledge, right? Just like how the king, you see the king performed karma yoga. He performed his activities very wonderfully, right? But he wasn't satisfied, and that led him to search out knowledge. So he actually searched out knowledge, jnana yoga. He went to search in different places, finally found his guru. And once jnana is basically getting knowledge to understand the difference between matter and spirit. Because in karma yoga, we don't know about matter and spirit. We just do our duty for the pleasure, for the sake of duty. So that builds the culture of sacrifice, then brings to the culture of knowledge. And in knowledge, one tries to understand the difference between matter and spirit, right? And then once he knows that I am spirit, once he comes to that realization that I am spirit soul, that I am not matter, right? Then he is at that point already known as liberated. But he doesn't know what to do further. So just being freed from the material cycle, but he can again drop back into the material cycle because he doesn't know how to engage himself in the right way. What to do? What does a free person do? So free person must do something. So therefore, then if he continues in this jnana path, if he continues seeking in this jnana path, he wants to seek that he will come to that realization at the end of knowledge, at the end of all knowledge is the understanding that everything comes from that supreme person. That is the end of knowledge. Everything emanates from one Supreme Personality. Vasudevam Sarvam Iti. They come to that understanding. So then they want to search for that Vasudeva. They want to find, where is this Vasudeva? Where is this Supreme Personality? So in the Jnana path, that will bring one to the next level, which is called Dhyana. So that is chapter 6, Dhyana Yoga. Remember, chapter 3 was Karma Yoga, chapter 4 was Jnana Yoga, and chapter 5 was telling about how one can cross from this Jnana path to another path, the path of Bhakti. And then chapter 6 goes back to Dhyana Yoga to complete this thing off, so that after that Krishna will focus fully on the Bhakti path. So what is Jnana path? That is what chapter 6 describes. So Dhyana, right? Dhyana means meditation. It is also known as Raja Yoga. It is also known as Ashtanga Yoga. Ashtanga means the 8 limbs of yoga. So remember also, we discussed this in Gita Gyan level 1. So basically, it begins with yama and niyama, do's and don'ts. You know, it will say, go to a secluded place, a holy place, away from other people. One has to follow celibacy, brahmacharya, give up all this sense gratification, give up family. So that is the path of jnana. To do dhyana yoga, one has to do all these things. This is the recommendation. One cannot possibly do dhyana yoga situated in family life. That is not that is prohibited in the jnana path. Of course, one may do that for health and all these things, but if one wants to achieve that ultimate goal of dhyana, then this is the do's and don'ts one has to follow, and that's just the beginning. After following the do's and don'ts, then comes asana. Asana means postures. To practice various health postures, you know, yoga asanas, hatha yoga, so that one can condition one's body so that one can sit in meditation for a long time. So the whole purpose of asanas and postures is to come to the level of where a person can sit in Padmasana for hours. So that is called asana siddhi. To come to the level of asana siddhi, to the perfection of able to sit for hours without disturbances, comfortably. After asana, then one comes to the level of pranayama. Then only one begins pranayama seriously. Before that, it's just practice pranayama only. So when one has perfected asana, then one pranayama means to control the breath. You know, the breathing exercises, various, the yama, the kumbhaka, rikshaka, to inhale. Inhale is rikshaka. Inhale is, I can't remember the name. And then to hold the breath, that is kumbhaka. And then to exhale, now that's rikshaka. So purvaka is to inhale. Purvaka is to inhale, kumbhaka is to hold it, rakshaka is to exhale. So there's a certain way to do it. By doing this, what can happen? One focuses, one sharpens his concentration and focus. So after pranayama, then comes pratyahara. Pratyahara means to, at that time, one completely needs full dedication. One has to let go sense gratification. I'm no longer interested in satisfying my senses. I bring my senses inward. So that's pratyahara. After pratyahara, together with pranayama and pratyahara, one comes to the stage called dhyana. One comes to the stage called dharana. Dharana means concentration. So one is able to concentrate on one thing for long periods of times without disturbances, no matter what can disturb. This is the level of delta wave. You know, the brain will come to the form of delta waves. So that is dharana. After dharana, practice of intense dharana from one level to another level, from a few seconds, few minutes to longer minutes, to no more than to an hour, to more than an hour. So like that, there are ways to do it. Eventually, one comes to the level of dhyana. Then only comes to the process of meditation. One is able to sit for long periods of time, concentrating one's full being into that particular personality, trying to find that Paramatma within the heart. And then finally, one attains samadhi when one is able to attain this Paramatma. So this is the process of Dhyana Yoga. It is not very practical in this Kali Yuga. So most people can't even follow the Yam and Niyam. What to speak of mastering the Asana Siddhi or even Pranayam. So people put on a show of doing all these things. Of course, it's good for health, good for concentration and many other things. But as far as liberation or spiritual emancipation is discussed, is very rare. The person who's able to attain this kind of levels are very, very rare. And it's certainly not something which can be done by others. But even at the Dhyana Yoga level, you can see, right? Basically, this is the mechanical process of controlling the mind. So you can see verses 6.5 to verses 6.6. It talks about how we control the mind mechanically in this way and use the mind's help to deliver ourselves. So, and it's such a difficult path, right? So Bhagavad Gita, Krishna himself will say it's difficult. Arjuna will say it's difficult, and Krishna say, yes, it's difficult, but it's possible. Krishna will tell Arjuna, it is possible. 635 to 636, he will say it's possible. How? By suitable determination and detachment. So one needs this, then it's possible. Determination must be very strong. And then Krishna continues, what happens if somebody fails? Okay, before I go into that, right? So here, here there is a verse, previous chapter, where Krishna was slowly bringing these points of chapter 6. In chapter 5.6, he says, merely renouncing all activities. So this part of this jnana path, which includes karma, jnana, and dhyana, it requires renunciation. So merely renouncing all activities, yet not engaging in devotional service of the Lord, cannot make one happy. So Krishna is not recommending this jnana path to Arjuna. So he says, but a thoughtful person engaged in devotional service can achieve the supreme without delay. So he's telling Arjuna, actually there are two ways, right? There's the jnana path. And then he goes on to explain the jnana path in detail in chapter 6. But then in the beginning, before he starts explaining itself, in chapter 5 itself, Krishna already tells Arjuna, I'm going to tell you about the jnana path, but really, it's a very difficult path. Don't follow that path. I don't recommend it. But still, for completeness, I want to tell that path also. So therefore, he continues in chapter 6, right? So then he tells there is a better path to follow. So the yogi whose mind is fixed on me verily attains the highest perfection of transcendental happiness. So what Krishna says here in 627, that yogi whose mind is fixed on me. So what does this mean? How can you fix your mind on the Lord? So one can do it in two ways. Either one can go through the karma yoga, jnana yoga, dhyana yoga, and then after that come to the process of meditation, and then samadhi, and then in this way fix the mind in the heart in a mechanical way. That is one path. But there is an easier path, a happier path, right? So that happier path is bhakti path. So Krishna will talk about this. And he says, ultimately, both also, the goal is eventually to fix the mind on me. Ultimately, both path is to fix the mind on me. And if you see in the dhyana path, right, in the jnana path, the fixing of the mind on the Lord only takes place in the dhyana yoga stage. It doesn't take place in karma yoga. It doesn't take place in jnana yoga. It only takes place at this stage. So it's so much one has to go through before one actually fixes one's mind on the Lord. But that same goal is easily attained right from the beginning itself. One practices bhakti yoga. One's goal is already fixing the mind on Krishna right from the beginning. So you can see here the goal changes. In karma yoga, the goal changes. In jnana yoga, the goal changes. Krishna only comes in here in dhyana yoga. Right? So therefore, he recommends Arjuna to take the bhakti path. And he says both also, ultimately the goal is the same. So he says, for one who sees me everywhere, sees everything in me, I am never lost, nor is he ever lost to me. So one has to come to this level, right? So such a yogi who engages in the worshipful service of the super soul, knowing that I and the super soul are one. So Krishna here tells that I am that super soul. So, and one who engages in that service to that super soul or to me directly always remains with me in all circumstances. So, and then he says, O mighty armed son of Kunti, it is undoubtedly very difficult to curb the restless mind, but it is possible. So therefore, this is the one I mentioned just now, right? So he was talking about the jnana path. So there is another path, that is the bhakti path. And this bhakti path is susukam, joyfully performed, right? Whereas the jnana path, Krishna himself says there is no happiness there. It's a very dry, difficult path. And it takes a long time. Whereas the bhakti path is much faster. So there's a verse in 5.2. The personality of Godhead replied, the renunciation of work and work in devotion are both good. So what is he saying? The jnana path and the bhakti path are both good for liberation. So only these two paths within the Nivriti Marga can give liberation. The Pravriti Marga cannot, right? But of the two, work in devotional service is better than renunciation of work. Because ultimately the jnana path is to renounce everything and become to meditate silently in a faraway place, in a lonely place. That is the goal of the jnana path. But between these paths, he's saying, better for you to do devotional service. This is far superior and far easier to attain. So chapter 6 verse 45. And when the yogi engages, so then after that, chapter 6, as I said, Krishna is mainly talking about the jnana path. But as he is talking about the jnana path, just so that people don't misunderstand, earlier in chapter 5 itself, Krishna gave some indications of how he wants Arjuna to follow the bhakti path. And then in chapter 6 also, here and there, Krishna continues giving indications that the bhakti path is better, though he devotes full of the chapter to talk about the jnana path. So we can understand that in the jnana path, right, what is the beginning? The beginning is one performs his duty for the sake of duty, not accepting the fruits. Okay, that is jnana path. You see, Krishna is not in the picture here. There is no Supreme Lord in the picture here. So these are the jnani, the karma yogis. So culture of sacrifice eventually leads to culture of knowledge, and one starts to search out in scripture in various ways about what is the goal of everything. He understands the difference between spirit and matter. He searches for the source of spirit and matter. He comes to the level of understanding everything is Brahman, and that is Jnana Yoga. But after understanding everything is Brahman, one gets hints that that Brahman has a source. Bhagavad Gita says so, right? Krishna says, I am that source of that Brahman. So they start searching for that divinity, that source of that Brahman within their heart. Because scripture says, within the heart there is Paramatma. So the knowledge of Paramatma comes into their understanding. So then they carefully follow Dhyana Yoga and they perform meditation. They finally come to realize the Paramatma within the heart is actually the Supreme Lord Krishna himself. So therefore 645, Krishna says, when that yogi is talking about this jnana path yogi, this jnana yogi, this path here, when this jnana yogi performs dhyana, when the yogi engages himself with sincere endeavor in making further progress. So you see, there is further progress to attain from dhyana yoga. It's not the highest yet. Being washed of all contaminations, then ultimately achieving perfection after many births of practice, he attains the supreme goal. So what is that supreme goal? Krishna will say in the next verse. But you can see here, he took many births of practice. So it's not easy. So Krishna is telling Arjuna, don't take this path. It's not easy. So there's a lot of danger. You fall off, but there is no loss. If you fall off also, you will enjoy in heaven. After that, you come back and take birth amongst you. You continue where you left off. So in both paths, there is no loss, right? One continues from where they left off. So then he attains the supreme goal. So from dhyana, eventually one does come to bhakti also. Because in jnana, they get a hint about the Supreme Lord. In dhyana, they realize the Supreme Lord is within their heart. And then what they do, they start to perform worship for that Supreme Lord. You can see here the previous verse I mentioned, right? Such a yogi who engages in the worshipful service of the super soul, knowing that I and the super soul are one. So he begins to worship. So dhyana, from dhyana, he worships. So therefore, he also eventually comes to the bhakti path only. So this is the long about way, or we can directly take the short bhakti path. So therefore, chapter 6, Krishna says, yes, it's a difficult path. The verses are here, 629 to 634 as evidence, where Krishna is trying to dissuade Arjuna from following this path. But it is possible to give hope for those of them who still want to take this path. What about failure? Arjuna will ask, since it's so difficult, if somebody fails, what happens to them? Then Krishna says, don't worry, no loss in this path. In this Nivritti Marga, there's no loss. Even if somebody tries a little bit and they fail, then because they tried this path, they will actually in their next life, they will get wonderful reward in heaven. They enjoy heavenly life for hundreds and thousands of years. After that, they come back to earth, take a human form, and somehow they will get connected with this yogic path again, where they left off, and they will continue. So from there, they don't start from scratch. They continue from where they left off. You know? So that is what happens to someone who just short while practices this. But for someone who practiced for a long time, who has gone to a very high level and still they failed, for them, they will again take birth in a family of transcendentalists and continue where they left off from even a young age. So that is what happens. And after many births, at last they reach me. So Krishna says, this is the path of dhyana yogis. The Raja yogis or the dhyana yogis or the path of meditation. This is a very difficult, troublesome path. But Krishna says, in all circumstances, don't take the pravriti marga, don't take the path of sense gratification and materialism. Take the path of yogi. So he says, because the yogi is greater than the tapasvi. Tapasvi is one who performs austerities. Because he is simply performing austerities, but he has not come to the level of yoga, because yoga is doing austerities for a higher purpose. The purpose is to free oneself from birth and death. Higher than the jnani, higher than the karmi. So that is 646. Krishna says, so therefore be a yogi, Arjuna. But which yogi? To take the jnana path or to take the bhakti path? So Krishna then gives his final conclusion, 647. Right? Before that, I'll just say this verse, 646. A yogi is greater than the ascetic, greater than the empiricist, greater than the fruitive worker. Therefore, O Arjuna, in all circumstances, aim to be a yogi. But Krishna will say to Arjuna, but I'm not asking you to be the jnani. I want you to go and take up the bhakti path. So this is the last verse in chapter 647. So after talking fully about the jnana yoga, see what Krishna says here. Yoginam api sarvesham. Of all the yogis, yoginam api sarvesham. Sarvesham means of all who? Of all the yogis. Mad gatinantar atmana. Mad means to me. The one with great faith who always abides in me, thinks of me, right, within himself, and renders transcendental loving service to me. Shraddhavan, look at this, is the important verse here. Shraddhavan means with faith. And where does faith come? Faith comes especially in Bhakti Yoga. Bhajate, renders service to me, devotional service. This is Bhakti, Bhajate Yomam. So one who renders service to me, that person is Yukta Tamo Mataha, the highest of all. So this is the ultimate goal of spirituality, the Nivritti Marga. So therefore, in Nivritti Marga, there is something called Bhakti Marga. That Bhakti Marga is the perfection of Nivritti Marga. One who follows the Bhakti Marga is perfecting that Nivritti Marga. So that is basically the conclusion of Bhagavad Gita Chapter 6, right? So the idea is, in short, don't take the path of sense gratification, right? There are many things in the Vedas which talk about sense gratification. You know, there are many yagyas, there are many, astrology, putting rings and all these things, doing this puja, this yantra, that yantra. All this is for material prosperities. So that is the punya karma. But that will not give liberation. So rather, Krishna says, become a yogi. Take up the Nivritti Marga. So in the Nivritti Marga itself, there are two paths, the Jnana path, the path of light or the path of renunciation, and there is the Bhakti path. So the Bhakti path is ultimately the perfection, because even if you take the Jnana path, eventually you have to come to Bhakti only. So the Jnana path is the roundabout way to come to Bhakti. Then you may ask, why this roundabout way? Why not just go straight to Bhakti? The answer to that is because not everyone can take up Bhakti. Krishna will tell Arjuna later on in the chapters, chapter 12, chapter 9, he will tell, I am telling you this Bhakti. He starts telling about Bhakti Yoga to Arjuna, and then he will tell Arjuna, I am telling you this because you are not envious of me. You are anasuya. So only those who are not envious of God, they can take the Bhakti path. So in this world, there are many people, they cannot bow down to God. They cannot accept Krishna as the supreme. They cannot accept there is a higher. So therefore, for these people, Krishna doesn't abandon them. He tries to trick them. So the trick is this, to give this jnana path. So, karma yoga, okay, do your duty. You don't want to accept me as God. Okay, never mind, very simple. You do your duty, you do your work, but do it for work's sake. You don't want to do it for my sake, right? Okay, never mind. You do it for work's sake. So that is to tell them. So in this way, they get the culture of sacrifice, and so people will say, it's for the universe, it's for the universal, for providence, for fate. They like to use this kind of words. So because they don't want to focus on a personal God. So then eventually the culture of sacrifice will lead to culture of knowledge, and they'll start searching out. After they search out, eventually logic will bring them towards Krishna only in the end. So slowly they come towards that point. But that is a very advanced point already. That's already at a level of liberation. But as I said, one who is liberated needs, if you're free from the prison, right? We are no longer in the prison, but what do we do? So we need to be engaged properly, right? To be productive in society. So what is the right engagement? So Krishnera Jivera Swarupa Hoy, Krishnera Nityadas. The perfect dharma of the soul is to become Krishnera Nityadas, an eternal servant of Krishna. So that is our perfect engagement. That is the Swadharma of the soul. So we have to come to that realization. So Bhakti path is, from the beginning itself, people who are able to, bow down to the Lord, who are able to accept this point, they may not be very advanced in terms of controlling their senses or in their minds. But in the beginning itself, they have no problem accepting Krishna as God or Krishna as supreme. They have no problem accepting giving devotional service to the Lord. So then these people follow the bhakti path. Very quickly, they can purify their heart. The desires become purified. The mind very quickly becomes controlled and very quickly becomes automatically, naturally becomes focused on Krishna's lotus feet. They don't have to artificially do it through meditation, through, the yogic postures and all that, simply by rendering of devotional service. So devotional service, there are 9 types of devotional service, right? Shravanam, Kirtanam, Smaranam, Pada Sevanam, so like that. So it begins with hearing Bhagavad Gita, hearing about Krishna's pastimes, and continues with chanting, Kirtanam. So Kirtanam, so these are the food for the soul. So by chanting Krishna's holy names, right? So he says, right, of all sacrifices, I am the chanting of the holy names. So the culture of sacrifice is ultimately to chant the holy name, because Krishna says, I am that, the king of all sacrifices is japa, chanting the names of Krishna. That is the greatest sacrifice. So that will directly blossom, bring bhakti to blossom in our hearts. So that is the purpose. Okay, so with that, we'd like to end. Before we end, let us say this mantra. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Om Tat Sat. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Krishna Bhagavan ki jai. So thank you very much. So are there any questions? Anyone wants to raise any points or clarifications? So I hope whatever I spoke was, if you're able to understand, it made sense. So if at all you require clarification, feel free to message me or call me. I'm happy to explain again. And yeah, so I hope that we can continue chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra daily. So it takes only about 8 minutes to do 1 round. So if we dedicate half an hour, we can do 4 rounds using the beats. So here are the beats. You can get the beats. If you want the beats, you can tell me. I can try to get it for you online, or you can also go to our temple. The shop is open mornings and evenings, so you can get it there as well. So with that, we'd like to end. Thank you very much for listening. I'll see you all then. Hare Krishna.